Now, when it comes to The Mandalorian, one of the most talked about things in regards to it has been episode length, how sometimes they just feel really, really short, which can be rather frustrating considering the seasons are only 8 episodes long, and it sometimes seems like they're not exactly making the best use of that time. Like the episodes not only could be longer because we'd like a little bit more Star Wars in general, but like they should be longer because there's so much more they could be doing with them, even if it's just an extra couple minutes here and there to allow the story to slow down and breathe, to explore the characters a bit more and to let things build in order for it all to feel more robust as it goes along and more impactful when it ends. In fact, I've even wondered in some of my reviews and other videos about The Mandalorian along the way over the seasons, if this is being done intentionally. Are they purposely making the show this way? I mean, am I crazy, or are they truly reluctant to slow down the pace of the show in fear of, I don't know, they think they'll lose the audience because it's not Star Wars enough or something like that if it doesn't have a quick pace and plenty of action? And after a recent interview with Dave Filoni, one he did with Collider, it turns out I'm not crazy. And before going further into this, I'll play a clip from that interview right here and put a link to the whole thing in the description below should you want to check it all out. It's about 4 minutes long. And in this clip, he's basically been asked how long will episodes of the upcoming Ahsoka series be.
I would say it's pretty relative when you do this kind of work. One thing John and I are very adamant about is we try to, cut it down and strip it down to keep it moving. It's very much a faster, more intense rule that George has. So my episodes have actually started pretty long, because I wrote them all. So they're a little different. They're relative to other stuff that I've written and done, but like the episode The Jedi, but if it's got to be tight and fast because I need the action to work, it's going to be shorter. But I would say they're in the same range as Mandalorian episodes. Maybe on average a little longer, but I honestly don't know where they're at right now with the most recent cut down I've done. But I'd say it's in the same range. I mean, I like a long episode as much as anybody as long as it's moving,
Okay, so first of all here, I'm a big fan of Dave Filoni, as a lot of you probably already know. And one of the reasons I am is because he's someone who truly cares about Star Wars. He seems like he wants the best for it and to honor and carry on the legacy of George Lucas above almost anything and everything else, which I totally respect and think is usually a winning recipe. I think more often than not, the Filoni way inspired by Lucas works out pretty damn well. That said, I honestly don't think everything Star Wars needs to somehow mimic the George Lucas way exactly. I don't think Star Wars always needs to be faster, more intense, as Lucas did indeed say. I think in order for Star Wars to continue to succeed, we need to look at and understand why it not only was massively successful in the first place, but why it's endured for over 45 years at this point. And it's not just because that original movie was a fast-paced, fun, action-packed adventure that threw you in the middle of the action. I mean, yes, that is part of its success. Certainly people loved going along for the ride. I'm by no means saying action isn't important to Star Wars. It should always be a part of it to some degree, certainly. But why we still talk about it today, why the franchise has endured decades, is because of its settings, concepts, and characters, not the style of filmmaking. Those are what made Star Wars truly special and unique. Concepts like the Force, the exploration of good versus evil through the lens of selfless versus selfish, the numerous planets and other locations we see, characters like Han, Luke, Leia, Anakin, Padme, and so on. This is what helps Star Wars stand apart from the rest. I mean, if just doing faster, more intense was all it took to make an amazing film, well, Michael Bay would probably be the greatest filmmaker of our time, the Transformers series would probably be considered the greatest films ever, and The Rise of Skywalker would be considered a masterpiece because all it did was faster, more intense, and bombarded you with one pointless action scene after another. Though, interestingly enough, the one time it does really slow down and let the characters truly have a moment, that being the scene between Ben and Han on the ruins of the second Death Star, well, that is, in my opinion, and for whatever it's worth considering the rest of the film, it is the best, most interesting part of the entire movie. It was maybe the only time I ever really cared about what was going on and really felt something. And though sure, we all have different reasons for watching or reading or playing anything, we all have different preferences when it comes to entertainment, and I think that's fine. But for me, I don't see much of a reason to watch something if I genuinely don't care. Action means little to nothing to me if there are either no stakes or I don't care about them because I don't care about the characters involved or the danger they're in. And it's generally hard to really get to know characters if they just go from one action scene to the next. If again, they never slow down and just say, let two characters talk to each other, or put them in a different type of stressful situation that doesn't necessarily involve being shot at or being beat up or in some sort of epic chase sequence. And almost ironically, you could say, yesterday in a video I talked about how arguably one of the best scenes in the Mandalorian series on the whole, maybe the very best scene, is the one where Miggs Mayfeld confronts his former superior officer, that being in the 7th episode of Season 2, the episode called The Believer. And at face value, it's a scene that's a little more than two guys sitting in a room talking to each other for roughly 4 straight minutes. Yet the tension that scene builds had me on the edge of my seat, probably more than any other scene in the whole series. Certainly more than yet another action scene of Din Djarin conveniently getting shot in the Beskar, and only the Beskar would ever have, or watching Grogu manage to hop away from a bunch of supposedly elite Praetorian guards would. And yes, I do understand what the Mandalorian wants to be, or what they, Favreau and Filoni, want it to be. They want it to be a bit more like classic Star Wars. They've said before they wanted to be inspired by what inspired Lucas to create Star Wars in the first place. And one of the biggest inspirations Lucas had was the serialized shows of his childhood, shows like Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, which are, or were, far more action than substance and always kept the story moving at a very brisk pace. And though I certainly don't hate that idea in concept, in fact, as I was kind of saying before, I like that Filoni wants to honor Lucas and make something that Lucas either would have made himself or would enjoy. But at the same time, you have to ask what audiences really want today from a long-running series. You have to remember that we live in a world where shows like Game of Thrones and Breaking Bad exist and have changed things forever, redefined what can be done with a series and thus what many viewers want and expect. And they weren't groundbreaking because they were faster, more intense. It was because they trusted themselves to take the time to tell a story and trusted the audience wouldn't get bored if they took more than 5 minutes to get to the next action scene. And when it did have an action scene, you felt the weight of it. You felt the fear for the characters because it wasn't something that just happened all the time for the sake of it. Heck, even Andor, which I rank up there with one of the best shows I've ever seen, has changed the landscape. It's shown that taking Star Wars very seriously can work because, again, it's not the formula that necessarily makes Star Wars great. Star Wars is not a genre unto itself. It's a setting that can and should be explored in many different ways. Which, yes, also does include that more old-school approach. I'm not saying that The Mandalorian or the upcoming Ahsoka series should become just like Andor. I like that they're not the same, that we can have different approaches and tones to a show in Star Wars. I'm simply saying this idea that Lucas's approach must always be mimicked, or this fear of pretty much ever slowing down the show, or being so concerned about the action as if it's the only thing anyone ever watches it for, I'm saying that's holding them and the series back. I'm saying an extra couple minutes here and there to explore the characters, and it really would just be a few minutes here and there, is what the show is missing most. I mean, the 3rd season of The Mandalorian had this very weird, uncanny feeling to it, like it was both rushing somewhere yet going nowhere at the same time. We moved from plot point to plot point quickly, but rarely bothered to explore what any of it meant to the characters. And it was so bad that when the season was over, I wasn't sure how I was even supposed to feel about any of it. But anyway, that's just my 2 cents. As I said before, we all want different things out of entertainment, especially as entertainment evolves. For better or worse, those serialized shows Lucas grew up with would likely be laughed at by most kids these days, even though in some ways they might be better than what kids are actually watching today. Which is why they shouldn't be abandoned entirely, why the concept isn't bad, but I feel the execution needs to be changed a bit. There can and should be more to that approach because that's what audience want and expect today. They want and expect more. They want more than action for the sake of action, for the sake of keeping them, I don't know, stimulated, even though there's no emotion behind it, which makes it feel like little more than watching someone smash action figures together. It makes the characters feel plastic and lifeless, and you don't actually care what happens to them, or you know nothing is going to happen to them because their main character plot armor is way too thick. Well, that's going to be all I got for you this time. So it's once again your turn to tell me what you think. Do you like The Mandalorian as is? Are you happy with its pace and frequent action? Or do you wish it'd take the time and slow down and explore the characters a bit more? Whatever you think, leave those comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.